August 6, 1945. 8:16 a.m. Hiroshima, Japan. Mrs. Kinue Tomoyasu stands in her kitchen. She is 44 years old, mother of 3, making breakfast for her children, rice and miso soup. The morning is bright, cloudless, temperature already 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Through her window, she sees her neighbor watering flowers, an old man walking his dog, 2 children playing with a ball. Normal life. Her youngest daughter, 8 years old, asks for more rice. Mrs. Tomoyasu smiles and reaches for the pot. At that exact moment, 31,000 feet above her head, Bombardier Thomas Farraby presses a button. A single bomb drops from the Enola Gay. Weight, 9,700 pounds. Length, 10 feet. Diameter, 28 inches. Painted dull gray. Nickname, Little Boy. It falls for 43 seconds. Mrs. Tomoyasu is still reaching for the rice pot. Her daughter is waiting. The neighbor is watering flowers. The old man is walking his dog. The children are playing. 70,000 people are going about their normal morning. At 1,900 feet altitude, uranium atoms begin splitting, releasing energy, creating heat, building pressure. In 0.0001 seconds, the temperature at the bomb's core reaches 1 million degrees Celsius, 6 times hotter than the center of the sun. Mrs. Tomoyasu's body vaporizes, not burned, not killed, vaporized, turned into carbon atoms in the air. Her daughter disappears. The rice pot melts. The wooden house disintegrates. The neighbor watering flowers becomes a shadow burned into concrete. The old man and his dog cease to exist. The children playing with the ball leave no trace except their shadows on a wall. In 1 second, 70,000 people die. No bodies, no graves, just shadows and ash. The shockwave travels outward at 768 miles per hour. Buildings 1 mile away collapse like cardboard. People 2 miles away have their skin blown off their bodies. Glass from windows becomes thousands of flying blades slicing through flesh. Metal from buildings melts and rains down. A mother shields her baby. Both turn to charcoal. A businessman runs toward his office. The building collapses on him, crushing him flat. A schoolyard of children at morning assembly. All 87 die instantly when their school implodes. The firestorm begins 3 minutes later. Temperatures reach 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to boil blood, to melt eyeballs, to ignite human fat. People who survived the initial blast start burning. A nurse runs from the hospital. Her clothes catch fire. Her hair ignites. She jumps into a river. The water is boiling. She cooks alive. A father finds his son in the rubble. The boy is alive, covered in burns, skin hanging off in sheets. The father tries to carry him. The skin comes off in his hands like wet tissue paper. The boy screams, then dies. The father is still holding pieces of his son's skin. By 8:20 a.m., 4 minutes after detonation, 140,000 people are dead or dying. A city of 350,000 reduced by 40% in less time than it takes to brew coffee. And 6,000 miles away, the man who ordered this has been president for exactly 115 days. His name is Harry S. Truman. 115 days earlier, he was vice president, a job so powerless that he spent most days presiding over an empty Senate chamber, reading newspapers, taking lunch, going home at 5 p.m. The President of the United States never told him about the atomic bomb, never briefed him on military strategy, never explained what to do if suddenly given the power to vaporize entire cities. 82 days as vice president, 0 briefings, 0 preparation, 0 knowledge. Then Roosevelt died, and Harry Truman inherited 2 atomic bombs and the decision whether to use them. He had 115 days to decide, 115 days to learn about a weapon that could end human civilization, 115 days to weigh 140,000 Japanese lives against 1 million American lives, 115 days to become the first human being in history to order nuclear weapons used against cities. This is not the story of a great man making a heroic choice. This is the story of an ordinary man from Missouri who was deliberately kept ignorant and then forced to make the hardest decision in human history. With less preparation than most people get before a job interview. How did this happen? And why did the man who gave Truman power refuse to give him knowledge. Section 2. Roosevelt's Betrayal, the Systematic Exclusion, 951 words, January 20th, 1945. Washington, D.C. Snow covers the White House grounds. Temperature 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Vice President-elect Harry Truman stands on the south portico. He is about to be sworn in. 12,000 people watch from the lawn, but they can barely see, because Roosevelt insisted on an outdoor ceremony despite the brutal cold. Roosevelt sits in a chair. He cannot stand. His hands shake uncontrollably when he holds the Bible. His face is gray, hollow. His personal physician, Dr. Howard Bruin, stands 10 feet away, watching, ready to intervene if Roosevelt collapses. Bruin knows something nobody else knows. Roosevelt is dying. Blood pressure, 260/150. Normal is 120/80. Roosevelt's arteries are so damaged that Bruin gives him 3 months to live, maybe less. The ceremony lasts 15 minutes, the shortest inauguration in American history. Roosevelt gives a 5-minute speech. His voice is weak, barely audible. He stumbles over words, loses his place twice. Truman watches. Everyone watches. Everyone knows. The President of the United States is dying in front of them. After the ceremony, Truman approaches Roosevelt. "Mr. President, is there anything I can do to help?" Roosevelt looks at him, blank stare, as if he doesn't recognize Truman. Then Roosevelt's assistant steps in. "The President needs to rest," he says. Truman is dismissed. No meeting, no briefing, no instructions, nothing. That was the longest conversation Truman and Roosevelt ever had. For the next 82 days, Roosevelt shut Truman out completely, not by accident, by design. Roosevelt's chief of staff, Admiral William Leahy, received explicit orders. Do not brief the vice president on military operations. Do not include him in cabinet meetings unless protocol requires it. Do not give him intelligence reports. Do not tell him about the Manhattan Project. Leahy questioned these orders. "Mr. President, if something happens to you, he'll need to know these things." Roosevelt's response was chilling. "Nothing is going to happen to me," he said. "And if it does, that's his problem." This wasn't negligence. This was deliberate sabotage. Roosevelt didn't trust Truman, didn't choose him, didn't want him. The Democratic Party forced Truman on Roosevelt. They needed someone moderate, someone inoffensive, someone who wouldn't threaten the Southern Democrats who controlled the party machinery. Truman was perfect because he was boring. No controversial opinions, no powerful enemies, no presidential ambitions. He was a placeholder, a warm body to fill the constitutional requirement. And Roosevelt treated him accordingly. February 4th, 1945. Roosevelt leaves for Yalta to meet with Stalin and Churchill to negotiate the post-war world. Truman learns about it from the newspaper. The Vice President of the United States reads about the most important diplomatic conference of the war in the Washington Post. Nobody briefed him beforehand. Nobody consulted him during negotiations. Nobody informed him of the agreements afterward. Truman is completely in the dark. March 1st, 1945. Roosevelt returns from Yalta. He gives a speech to Congress. Truman attends. He watches Roosevelt struggle to the podium. The president can barely walk. His legs are failing. For the first time in his presidency, Roosevelt sits while speaking. He has never done this before. The symbolism is obvious. Roosevelt is dying. Everyone in that chamber knows it, including Truman. But still, nobody tells Truman anything. March 29th, 1945. Roosevelt leaves Washington for Warm Springs, Georgia, his personal retreat. He needs rest. Everyone knows he's dying. His staff knows. His family knows. His doctors know. But they tell Truman nothing. No briefing on succession procedures. No explanation of ongoing operations. No preparation for taking over. Nothing. April 12th, 1945. 1:15 p.m. Warm Springs, Georgia. Roosevelt is sitting for a portrait. He's reviewing documents, signing papers. His hands shake so badly he can barely hold the pen. Suddenly he stops, presses his hand to his forehead. "I have a terrific headache," he says. Those are his last words. He collapses forward, unconscious. His staff calls Dr. Bruin immediately. Bruin arrives 20 minutes later. He takes one look at Roosevelt, checks his pulse, listens for breathing. Nothing. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt is dead. Massive cerebral hemorrhage, brain bleeding so severe that death was instant. The President of the United States died reviewing paperwork. At 3:35 p.m., the White House staff is notified. They begin making calls. Cabinet secretaries, military chiefs, foreign leaders. But they don't call Truman immediately. They wait. Almost 2 hours. Nobody wants to tell the vice president, because nobody has prepared him for this. At 5:25 p.m., someone finally calls Truman's office. Steve Early, the press secretary. He doesn't say Roosevelt is dead. He just says, "Come to the White House immediately." Truman is having a drink with the Speaker of the House. Bourbon and water, relaxing after a normal day of presiding over Senate business. He thinks it's a routine meeting. Maybe Roosevelt wants to discuss legislation. Truman takes a taxi, not a government car, because nobody told his office to send one. He arrives at the White House at 7:05 p.m., still has no idea what's happening. Eleanor Roosevelt is waiting in the study. She walks toward him, puts her hand on his shoulder. "Harry," she says quietly, "the president is dead." Truman stands frozen, completely still. For 5 seconds he doesn't move, doesn't speak, doesn't react. His face shows nothing. Then he finds his voice. "Is there anything I can do for you?" he asks. Eleanor Roosevelt looks at this ordinary man from Missouri, this person who knows nothing about running the country, about the war, about the decisions that need to be made. "Is there anything we can do for you?" she asks. "You are the one in trouble now." At 7:09 p.m., Harry S. Truman is sworn in as the 33rd President of the United States. The ceremony lasts 1 minute and 28 seconds. Chief Justice Harlan Stone administers the oath. No Bible is available. Nobody thought to bring one. Truman stands in the cabinet room, surrounded by Roosevelt's cabinet, men who worked with Roosevelt for 12 years, men who know everything, while Truman knows nothing. The ceremony ends. Truman is now president, and he still doesn't know about the atomic bomb. Section 3. The first 24 hours. Learning the unthinkable. 1400-1600 words. April 12, 1945. 7:11 p.m. 2 minutes after being sworn in. Secretary of War Henry Stimson approaches Truman. Stimson is 77 years old, served under 5 presidents, knows more about American military secrets than anyone alive. "Mr. President," he says quietly, "I need to speak with you about an immense project." Truman is still processing that he's president. "Can it wait until tomorrow?" Truman asks. Stimson's face is grim. "No, sir, it cannot wait." They move to a corner of the room, away from others. Stimson leans in close. "We have developed a new explosive," he says, "of almost unbelievable power." Truman stares at him. "How powerful?" he asks. Stimson chooses his words carefully. "Powerful enough to destroy an entire city with a single bomb." Truman thinks Stimson is exaggerating, or joking. "That's impossible," Truman says. "I wish it were," Stimson replies. "I'll brief you fully tomorrow." Stimson walks away, leaving Truman standing there, 2 hours as president. And he just learned America has a weapon that can vaporize cities, except he doesn't believe it yet. April 13th, 1945. 8:30 a.m. Truman's first morning as president. He woke up in his apartment, not the White House. Eleanor Roosevelt is still living there. She needs time to move out. So the President of the United States commutes to work from his 2-bedroom apartment on Connecticut Avenue. 24 Secret Service agents now guard him. Yesterday, he had 0. At 9 a.m., Stimson returns, this time with a file. Classified, top secret. Project name, Manhattan Project. Stimson opens the file on Truman's desk. Inside are photographs. Test facilities in New Mexico. Giant industrial buildings. Centrifuges. Scientists in white coats. Equipment Truman doesn't recognize. "Mr. President, we have successfully split the uranium atom," Stimson begins. Truman knows nothing about physics. He studied artillery in World War I, basic ballistics, trajectory calculations. "What does splitting an atom mean?" he asks. Stimson tries to explain. "Atoms are tiny particles that make up everything. Certain atoms, when split, release enormous energy. Einstein predicted this theoretically in 1905. German scientists confirmed it in 1938. American scientists weaponized it in 1945. How much energy? Truman asks. Stimson pulls out calculations. One bomb will be equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT. Truman does the math in his head. The largest American bomb currently in use is 10 tons. This is 2,000 times more powerful. That's... Truman can't finish the sentence. Impossible? Stimson suggests. 3 years ago, I would have agreed. Stimson spreads more documents across the desk. Cost, $2 billion. That's $32 billion in 2024 dollars. Workers, 130,000 people. Facilities, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos, New Mexico. 3 entire secret cities built for this project. How did this stay secret? Truman asks. Compartmentalization, Stimson explains. Workers only know their specific task. The centrifuge operator doesn't know what he's enriching. The engineer doesn't know what he's building. Only a handful of people know the full scope. And President Roosevelt was one of them? Yes, sir. Did he ever tell the vice president? Stimson's silence is answer enough. Truman feels anger rising. Roosevelt knew. For years, Roosevelt knew. Spent $2 billion, employed 130,000 people, built 3 secret cities, and never told his vice president, never briefed the man who would have to use this weapon if Roosevelt died, which Roosevelt did. When will it be ready? Truman asks. We're testing the plutonium design in July, Stimson says. If successful, we'll have 2 bombs ready by August. 2? Truman asks. Only 2? Production is extremely difficult, sir. Each bomb requires processing tons of uranium ore, or building nuclear reactors to create plutonium. We can make more, but it takes months. Truman sits back, processing this. 24 hours ago, he was vice president, a ceremonial job. He broke ties in the Senate, attended funerals, gave speeches to small groups. Now he's being told America has a weapon that can destroy entire cities, and he'll have to decide whether to use it. How many people would it kill? Truman asks. The question everyone knew was coming. Stimson pulls out another document. Casualty estimates for Japanese cities. Tokyo, 300,000 to 500,000. Osaka, 200,000 to 400,000. Hiroshima, 100,000 to 150,000. Nagasaki, 60,000 to 100,000. Truman reads the numbers 3 times. These aren't military casualties. These are total deaths. Soldiers and civilians, men, women, and children. These are estimates, Stimson says. Nobody has ever used an atomic weapon before. Nobody knows exactly what will happen. At 10:30 a.m., General George Marshall arrives, Army Chief of Staff, the man who built the American military machine. He carries maps of Japan, detailed invasion plans, Operation Downfall. 2 phases. Operation Olympic in November 1945. Invasion of Kyushu, the southernmost island. Expected casualties, 267,000 Americans. Operation Coronet in March 1946. Invasion of Honshu and the Tokyo Plain. Expected casualties, up to 1,000 Americans. Marshall spreads the maps on Truman's desk. Sir, these are conservative estimates, Marshall says, based on our experience at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Truman knows those battles. Iwo Jima, 7,000 Americans dead in 36 days. Okinawa, still ongoing, already 12,000 Americans dead. The Japanese are fighting harder the closer we get to their home islands, Marshall continues. They're using kamikaze attacks, suicide charges, civilian militias armed with bamboo spears, women and children trained to fight with grenades. Marshall shows Truman photographs, dead Japanese soldiers, piles of bodies, some holding grenades, some with suicide belts. They will not surrender, Marshall says. Their military code forbids it. We will have to kill them all. Every soldier, every militiaman, every civilian who takes up arms. The invasion will be a bloodbath. Truman stares at the photographs, then at the casualty estimates, then at the atomic bomb reports. 2 choices: invade Japan, kill 1 million Americans and potentially 5 to 10 million Japanese over 2 years of fighting, or use the atomic bomb. Kill 200,000, 400,000 Japanese in 2 days and force immediate surrender. Is there a third option? Truman asks. Blockade, Marshall says. Surround Japan with ships and aircraft. Starve them into submission. How long would that take? Years, maybe longer. And how many Japanese would die from starvation? Marshall pulls out more estimates. Millions. Japan imports most of its food. A total blockade would cause mass famine. So all three options kill millions. Invasion, mostly American deaths. Blockade, mostly Japanese civilian deaths from starvation. Atomic bomb, mostly Japanese civilian deaths from incineration. No good choice. No moral high ground. Just varying degrees of mass death. At 2 p.m., Admiral William Leahy arrives, Roosevelt's chief of staff. Leahy fought in the Spanish-American War. He's 69 years old, seen 4 wars, knows Roosevelt's mistakes. Mr. President, I need to tell you about Yalta, Leahy begins. For the next hour, Leahy explains what Roosevelt agreed to. Poland would be reorganized to include communists, which meant Soviet control. The Soviet Union would get territorial concessions in the Far East, in exchange for entering the war against Japan. Free elections would be held in Eastern Europe, which Stalin was already violating. President Roosevelt believed he could work with Stalin, Leahy says carefully. He believed personal diplomacy would prevent conflict. Was he right? Truman asks. No, sir. He was catastrophically wrong. Leahy shows Truman intelligence reports. Poland, communist government being installed by force. Czechoslovakia, Soviet troops occupying the country. Hungary, opposition leaders being arrested. Romania, rigged elections planned. Bulgaria, Soviet military control. Stalin is taking over Eastern Europe, Leahy says. And Roosevelt agreed to this? Roosevelt believed Stalin would honor the agreements. Stalin is violating them? Every single one. Truman feels something he hasn't felt since becoming president. Anger, not at Leahy, at Roosevelt. Roosevelt trusted Stalin. Roosevelt believed in cooperation. Roosevelt gave away half of Europe. And now Truman has to deal with the consequences. At 4 p.m., a telegram arrives. From Winston Churchill, marked urgent. Churchill has been trying to warn Roosevelt about Stalin for months. Roosevelt ignored him. Now Roosevelt is dead, and Churchill sees an opportunity. The telegram is 3 pages long, single-spaced, dense with detail, but one paragraph stands out. An iron curtain is drawn down upon their front. We do not know what is going on behind. There seems little doubt that the whole of the regions east of the line Lubeck-Trieste-Corfu will soon be completely in their hands. Truman reads it twice. Iron curtain. Churchill is telling him Europe is being divided. Soviet sphere in the east, democratic sphere in the west, and America has to decide which side to defend. At 6:30 p.m., Truman returns to his apartment. He's been president for 23 hours. He's learned about a weapon that can vaporize cities. Projected 1 million American casualties from invading Japan's Soviet expansion across Europe. Roosevelt's failed diplomacy with Stalin. Stalin's broken promises about free elections. And he has to decide what to do about all of it. His wife Bess is waiting. She's been First Lady for 1 day. Still doesn't fully understand what's happening. How was your first day? She asks. Truman looks at her, exhausted, overwhelmed, carrying the weight of decisions that will kill hundreds of thousands of people no matter what he chooses. I feel like the moon, the stars, and all the planets just fell on me, he says. That night, Truman doesn't sleep. He sits in his study, reading reports, studying maps, calculating casualties. Tomorrow he'll start making decisions. But tonight, he's still trying to understand the magnitude of what he's inherited. Section 4. Stalin's Trap. The enemy Roosevelt refused to see. 1-200-400 words. April 13th, 1945. Moscow, Soviet Union. 2 a.m. local time. Joseph Stalin receives word that Roosevelt is dead. He's in his office at the Kremlin. Hasn't slept. Stalin rarely sleeps more than 4 hours. He considers sleep a weakness. His chief of staff, Georgy Malenkov brings the telegram. Stalin reads it without expression, then reads it again. Interesting, he says. That's all. Just interesting. Malenkov waits for orders. Stalin lights his pipe, takes a long draw, thinks. Who is this Truman? Stalin asks. Senator from Missouri, Malenkov says. Vice president for 82 days. Roosevelt's choice? No. The party forced Roosevelt to take him. Stalin smiles. Not a warm smile, a predator's smile. So Roosevelt is dead, and America has a president nobody chose. A president with no experience. A president who knows nothing. Yes, Comrade Stalin. Stalin stands, walks to the map on his wall. Europe divided by colored pins. Red pins, Soviet-controlled territory. Blue pins, Allied-controlled territory. The red pins vastly outnumber the blue. Roosevelt was weak, Stalin says. He believed in cooperation. He thought personal friendship mattered. He was wrong. Stalin points to Poland. We agreed to free elections in Poland. Roosevelt actually believed we would hold them. Stalin laughs, a harsh, barking laugh. Free elections that might elect a government hostile to the Soviet Union? What kind of fool believes that? Malenkov says nothing. Stalin is not asking for an answer. Call a meeting of the Stavka, Stalin orders. We need to move quickly, before this new president understands what's happening. At 9 a.m. Moscow time, Stalin's top generals gather. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the man who captured Berlin. Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky, commander of Soviet forces in Poland. Marshal Ivan Konev, commander of forces in Czechoslovakia. These men command 12 million soldiers, the largest army in human history. Stalin addresses them directly. Roosevelt is dead, he begins. The Americans have a new president. A man with 82 days of experience as vice president. A man Roosevelt never briefed on anything important. This is our opportunity. Zhukov asks the obvious question. Opportunity for what, Comrade Stalin? To consolidate our control over Eastern Europe before the Americans realize what we're doing. Stalin walks to the map, points to Poland. We agreed at Yalta that Poland would have a coalition government, with communists and non-communists. That was a lie to satisfy Roosevelt. Now Roosevelt is dead. We will install a fully communist government, and the Americans will do nothing. He points to Czechoslovakia. We have 400,000 troops occupying Czechoslovakia. We will ensure they elect a communist government, or we will install one ourselves. Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. One by one, Stalin outlines his plan. Soviet troops already occupy all these countries, under the pretense of liberating them from the Nazis. Now those troops will ensure communist governments take power. Won't the Americans object? Rokossovsky asks. Of course, Stalin says. They will send diplomatic protests. They will threaten consequences. But they won't act. Why not? Because the American people are tired of war. They want their soldiers home. They want to rebuild. They won't fight another war over who governs Poland. Stalin is right, and he knows it. April 18, 1945. Warsaw, Poland. Soviet NKVD agents arrest 16 leaders of the Polish Home Army. These are the men who fought the Nazis since 1939, led the resistance, organized the Warsaw Uprising, legitimate leaders with the support of the Polish people. They were invited to negotiations about forming a coalition government. It was a trap. All 16 are arrested, shipped to Moscow, put on trial for collaboration with Germany. The evidence is fabricated. The trial is a show. The verdict predetermined. Guilty. Sentences range from 4 months to 10 years in labor camps. The message is clear. Anyone who opposes communist rule in Poland is a traitor, and traitors go to the Gulag. April 21, 1945. Washington, D.C. Truman receives his first intelligence briefing about the arrests. What did we do about it? Truman asks. Nothing, sir, the briefing officer says. President Roosevelt chose not to confront Stalin over Poland. Why not? He didn't want to jeopardize Soviet participation in the United Nations conference next month. Truman's face hardens. So Stalin arrests Polish leaders who fought the Nazis, and we do nothing because of a conference? Those were President Roosevelt's orders, sir. Truman stands up. Those aren't my orders, he says. Send a message to the Soviet foreign minister. Tell him I want to meet. April 23, 1945. 5:30 p.m. The Oval Office. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov arrives. He's 54 years old, Stalin's closest advisor. Negotiated the Nazi-Soviet pact in 1939. Participated in every major Soviet diplomatic initiative since. He expects a cordial meeting. The new American president is inexperienced, probably eager to maintain Roosevelt's cooperative approach. Molotov will test him, push boundaries, see how far he can go. Truman meets him at the door. No handshake, no small talk, no offer of refreshment. Truman sits down behind his desk, points to a chair. Sit, he says. Not an invitation, a command. Molotov sits, confused by the tone. Truman doesn't waste time. The Soviet Union is violating the Yalta agreements, Truman says. Molotov starts to respond. Truman cuts him off. You arrested the Polish resistance leaders, men who fought against Hitler for 6 years. You gave your word there would be free elections. You're breaking that word. Molotov tries to explain. The arrested men were German collaborators. Evidence proves they worked with the Nazis. The trials are legitimate. Truman interrupts again. I'm not interested in Soviet propaganda, he says. I'm interested in Soviet compliance with agreements your government signed. Molotov is shocked. Roosevelt never spoke to Soviet officials this way. Roosevelt was diplomatic, friendly, accommodating, always seeking compromise. This is different. Mr. President, Molotov says carefully, perhaps you don't understand the complexity of the situation. I understand perfectly, Truman snaps. Your government signed an agreement. Your government is violating that agreement. That's not complex. That's simple. Molotov tries a different approach. The Soviet Union has sacrificed millions of lives to defeat fascism. We have earned the right to security on our borders. Security doesn't mean occupation, Truman says. It doesn't mean rigged elections. It doesn't mean arresting democratic leaders. The meeting lasts exactly 20 minutes. Truman does 18 minutes of talking. Molotov does too. When Molotov leaves, he's visibly shaken. He immediately cables Stalin. The message is simple. The new president is not Roosevelt. He is hostile to Soviet interests. He will not cooperate. Stalin reads the telegram. He's not worried. He assumes Truman is posturing, trying to look tough for domestic consumption. Once Truman understands the reality, that the Red Army controls Eastern Europe and America can't do anything about it, he'll back down. Stalin is wrong about Truman, but right about the strategic situation. The Red Army occupies Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. 400,000 Soviet troops in Czechoslovakia alone, 1 million in Poland, 500,000 in Germany. Total, 3 million Soviet soldiers west of the Soviet border, all battle-hardened, all equipped with modern weapons, all under Stalin's absolute control. America has 3 million soldiers in Europe, but they're exhausted from 4 years of war. The American public wants them home. Congress is already demanding demobilization, and American forces are spread across Western Europe, not concentrated, not positioned to threaten Soviet control. Stalin knows this. He's counting on it. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders. VE Day. Victory in Europe. Celebrations erupt across America. Soldiers assume they'll be coming home soon. Families plan reunions. Parades are scheduled. The European war is over. Except it's not. Not really. Because while Germany is defeated, a new conflict is beginning between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies over who will control post-war Europe. Truman understands this. Stalin understands this. Churchill has been warning about it for months, but the American public doesn't understand it yet. They think the war is over. They're wrong. The war is just changing form. Section 5. The Weapon, Learning to Destroy Worlds, 1,600-1,800 words. July 15, 1945. Potsdam, Germany. Truman arrives for his first meeting with Stalin. The Potsdam Conference. Churchill is there, representing Britain. Stalin represents the Soviet Union. Truman represents the United States. Together, they will decide the fate of post-war Europe. The conference is held at Sicilienhof Palace, a 176-room mansion built for German royalty, now occupied by the Allies. Truman has been president for 94 days, still learning, still figuring out foreign policy, still discovering what Roosevelt promised and what Stalin violated. Stalin arrives 30 minutes late, deliberately, a power move. Make the Americans wait. Show who's really in control. Truman notices, says nothing, but remembers. They shake hands. Stalin is shorter than Truman expected, 5'5", but he radiates power, cold, calculating, absolutely confident. His eyes never leave Truman's face, studying him, assessing him, looking for weakness. The first meeting is ceremonial, introductions, pleasantries, agreeing on the agenda. Topics include German reparations, Polish borders, war crimes, trials, Soviet entry into the war against Japan. Truman watches Stalin carefully. Stalin's staff treats him with absolute fear. They stand when he enters, sit only when he gestures, never interrupt, never disagree. This is not a negotiation between equals. This is a dictator who rules through terror, and he thinks he can intimidate Truman. That night, Truman returns to his quarters. At 7:20 p.m., a coded message arrives from Secretary of War Stimson. 3 words. Babies satisfactorily born. Truman reads it twice, then 3 times. He understands immediately. The atomic bomb test succeeded. Everything just changed. Truman asks for details. The response arrives 2 hours later. Trinity Test Site, New Mexico Desert. Detonation at 5:29 a.m. local time. Yield, equivalent to 22,000 tons of TNT. More powerful than anyone predicted. Flash visible for 200 miles. Mushroom cloud rising 7.5 miles into the sky. Shockwave felt 100 miles away. Temperature at ground zero, 3 times hotter than the sun's surface. Sand melted into radioactive glass for 800 yards in every direction. The report includes a statement from Robert Oppenheimer, the physicist who designed the bomb. We knew the world would not be the same. A few people laughed, a few people cried, most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds. Truman reads this statement 3 times. Destroyer of worlds. That's what he now possesses. The power to destroy worlds. July 17, 1945. First full negotiating session at Potsdam. Topic: Poland's borders. Stalin wants Poland moved westward. Take German territory. Give Soviet territory to the USSR. Churchill objects. You can't simply redraw Europe's map. Stalin smiles coldly. The Red Army has already redrawn it. We're just recognizing reality. Reality? Churchill snaps. The reality is you're stealing German land. We liberated that land from the Nazis, Stalin says. Liberation? Churchill's voice rises. You're occupying it. With Soviet troops. Installing Soviet governments. That's not liberation. That's conquest. Stalin's expression doesn't change. Call it what you want, Prime Minister. The Red Army controls Eastern Europe. That is the reality. And reality doesn't care about your objections. Truman stays quiet, watching, learning, seeing how Stalin operates. State a position as fait accompli. Dare others to challenge it. If challenged, point to military occupation as justification. Never compromise. Never admit error. Always push. Churchill looks at Truman, expecting support. Truman says nothing. Not yet. He's waiting. July 24th, 1945. After the main session ends, Truman approaches Stalin, casual, as if making small talk. We have developed a new weapon, Truman says, of unusual destructive force. He watches Stalin's reaction carefully. Stalin shows nothing. No surprise, no curiosity, no concern, just nods. I hope you will use it against Japan, Stalin says, then walks away. That's it. No questions about what kind of weapon. No request for details, no interest. Truman is confused. Churchill saw the exchange, approaches Truman afterward. He already knows, Churchill says. What? Stalin knows about the atomic bomb. How? Soviet spies, Churchill explains. They've penetrated the Manhattan Project. We've known for months. Truman feels anger rising. Roosevelt knew the Soviets had spies in the bomb project? Yes. And he didn't tell me? Churchill's expression is sympathetic. Roosevelt didn't tell you many things, Mr. President. That night, Truman learns the details. Klaus Fuchs, German physicist, working at Los Alamos, feeding information to Soviet intelligence since 1942. Theodore Hall, American physicist, also at Los Alamos, also spying for the Soviets. David Greenglass, machinist at Los Alamos, recruited by the Soviets in 1944. The Manhattan Project has been compromised. For years, Stalin knows about the bomb, knows the design, knows the production methods. Soviet scientists are already working on their own version. But Stalin made a critical miscalculation. He assumes the atomic bomb is just another weapon, bigger than conventional bombs, but fundamentally the same. Something that will give America a temporary advantage, maybe 2 to 3 years. Then the Soviets will have their own. And the balance will be restored. Stalin doesn't understand the psychological impact, doesn't grasp that a weapon that can vaporize a city in 1 second changes everything, doesn't realize that Truman is willing to use it. July 25, 1945. Truman signs the order, authorizing the atomic bombing of Japan. Target cities: Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, Nagasaki. Final selection based on weather conditions. Timing: as soon as ready after August 3rd. The order is irreversible once issued. No procedure to recall it. Truman understands this. He asks for clarification. The targets are military facilities, General Leslie Groves answers, director of the Manhattan Project. The targets are cities with significant war production, which includes civilian workers. How many civilians? Truman presses. Groves has the estimates ready. Between 60,000 and 150,000, depending on the city and time of day. Truman is silent. 30 seconds of complete silence. Everyone in the room waits. Then Truman asks one more question. If we don't use this weapon, how many American soldiers die invading Japan? General Marshall answers. Conservative estimate, 500,000. Pessimistic estimate, 1,000,000. Truman signs the order. His signature is steady. No hesitation. No shaking hand. Just a signature. That will kill 214,000 people. Later, Truman will say it was the easiest decision he ever made as president. He's lying. It's the hardest decision any president has ever made. But Truman never shows doubt, never expresses regret, never apologizes, because he believes showing uncertainty would be worse than the bombing itself. A president must project absolute confidence, even when he has none, especially when he has none. August 6, 1945, 2:45 a.m., Tinian Island. The Enola Gay begins takeoff, a B-29 Superfortress. Crew, 12 men. Pilot, Colonel Paul Tibbets, age 30, 3,000 flight hours, commander of the 509th Composite Group, handpicked for this mission. Bombardier, Major Thomas Farabee, age 24. 63 combat missions, the best bombardier in the Air Force. In the bomb bay, Little Boy. Weight, 9,700 pounds. Length, 10 feet. Diameter, 28 inches. Contains 141 pounds of uranium-235, enriched to weapons grade, 99.1% pure. Yield, equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT. The Enola Gay lifts off at 2:45 a.m. Destination, Hiroshima. Distance, 1,500 miles. Flight time, 6 hours. The weather is perfect. Clear skies. No clouds. Visibility unlimited. At 7:09 a.m., the Enola Gay reaches Iwo Jima. Rendezvous with 2 observation aircraft. All 3 proceed to Japan. At 7:31 a.m., Japanese radar detects the aircraft, but only 3 planes. Too small for a bombing raid. Probably reconnaissance. No air raid warning is issued. At 8:09 a.m., the Enola Gay reaches Hiroshima. Altitude, 31,000 feet. The city spreads below. Population, 350,000. 7 rivers dividing the city into islands. Bridges connecting them. Buildings mostly wooden. Traditional Japanese architecture. factories producing military equipment, shipyards building submarines, military barracks housing 43,000 soldiers, but also schools, hospitals, homes, families. 8:14 a.m. Bombardier. Thomas Farabee takes control. He peers through the Norden bomb site, looking for the aiming point. The Ioi Bridge, T-shaped bridge in the center of the city. Perfect landmark. Easy to identify from 6 miles up. At 8:15 a.m. and 17 seconds, Farabee presses the release button. Little boy drops from the bomb bay. Free fall, no parachute, just gravity. The Enola Gay immediately banks hard right, diving away at maximum speed. Standard procedure to escape the blast radius. The crew has 43 seconds. Down in Hiroshima, life continues. Mrs. Kinwei Tomoyasu is making breakfast. Her daughter is waiting for rice. Mr. Eizo Nomura is walking to work. He's a bank clerk, 45 years old, father of 2. He's thinking about his son's upcoming birthday. Dr. Michihiko Hachiya is at Hiroshima Communications Hospital, starting his morning rounds. 200 patients. Mostly civilian injuries from American conventional bombing raids. Shima Surgical Clinic sits directly below the bomb's trajectory. Dr. Kaoru Shima is preparing for surgery. A young man with a burst appendix. Emergency operation. Scheduled for 8:30 a.m. At 8:15 and 50 seconds, little boy reaches 1,900 feet altitude. Radar altimeters detect the ground. The firing circuit activates. Inside the bomb, a uranium-235 projectile accelerates down a gun barrel, slamming into a uranium-235 target, creating critical mass. Nuclear chain reaction begins. At 8:16 a.m. exactly, atomic fission occurs. In 0.0101 seconds, temperature reaches 1,000 degrees Celsius, hotter than the core of the sun. A sphere of superheated plasma expands, 600 feet in diameter. Everything within this sphere vaporizes, instantly, not burned, not killed, vaporized, turned into atoms. Mrs. Tomoyasu disappears. Her daughter disappears. The rice pot melts. The wooden house disintegrates. No bodies, no remains, just shadows burned into concrete where they stood. Mr. Nomura, the bank clerk, vaporizes mid-step. His shadow is burned into the bank steps, a permanent silhouette, still visible today. Dr. Shima at the surgical clinic vaporizes along with his patient and 3 nurses. The clinic building vaporizes. The only trace? A depression in the ground where the foundation was. In the first 0.1 seconds, 70,000 people die. The fireball continues expanding, 200 feet in diameter. Temperature at the edge, 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to melt steel, vaporize concrete, ignite human flesh, instantly boil. Rivers turn sand to glass. At 0.3 seconds, the shockwave begins, traveling outward at 768 miles per hour, faster than sound, faster than a bullet. People don't hear it coming. It arrives before the sound. Buildings within 1 mile collapse. Not damaged. Collapse. Completely. Reduced to rubble in 2 seconds. 30,000 people crushed instantly. A mother shields her baby in a doorway. The building collapses on them. Both crushed flat, reduced to 6 inches thick. A businessman runs toward his office. The 6-story building implodes. He's inside when it happens, buried under 1,000 tons of concrete and steel. At Honkawa Elementary School, morning assembly in the courtyard. 400 children and 10 teachers, age 6 to 12. The shockwave hits. The school building collapses. All 410 people die, crushed, burned, suffocated. The only survivor, the janitor. He was in the basement. He crawls out 3 hours later, into hell. At 1.0 seconds, the thermal radiation pulse hits. Intense heat traveling at light speed. People 2 miles from ground zero experience 3rd-degree burns. Their skin blisters, then burns, then peels off in sheets. A nurse named Fukai runs from the hospital. Her uniform catches fire. Her hair ignites. She's screaming, running toward a river. She jumps in. The river water is boiling. She cooks alive. Her body found later. Skin completely gone. Just muscle and bone. Glass from windows becomes 100,000 flying blades, traveling at 500 miles, shredding everything in their path. A family huddles in their home. Father, mother, 3 children. The windows explode inward. Glass shards slice through them. The father loses both eyes. The mother's throat is cut. The children are decapitated. All 5 dead in 3 seconds. At 3.0 seconds, the mushroom cloud begins forming. Superheated air rises at 300 milliliters, carrying debris, ash, pulverized buildings, vaporized humans. The cloud rises to 40,000 feet, then spreads outward, blocking the sun. The city goes dark. Black rain begins falling. Not water, radioactive fallout, contaminated with uranium particles, fission products, plutonium isotopes. People drink it because they're desperately thirsty. They're poisoning themselves, but they don't know, won't know for days. At 10 minutes, the firestorm begins. Fires from destroyed buildings merge, creating one massive inferno. Temperature, 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to melt lead, boil blood, ignite human fat. The firestorm creates its own wind, hurricane-force winds, sucking oxygen into the center, suffocating everyone inside. A group of schoolchildren survive the initial blast. They're in a partially collapsed building, trapped. They can see outside. They watch the firestorm approach, screaming for help. The flames arrive. The building ignites. All 23 children burn alive. Dr. Hachia at Communications Hospital survived the blast. He was 1 mile from ground zero. His hospital partially collapsed. He's trapped under debris, bleeding from dozens of glass cuts. He hears patients screaming. Can't help them. Can't move. He lies there for 4 hours, listening to people burn to death. At 2 p.m., the fires are still burning. The mushroom cloud is still visible. Survivors begin emerging from rubble. What they see is incomprehensible. The city is gone. Not damaged. Gone. Buildings vaporized, streets covered in ash and bodies, corpses everywhere, burned, crushed, mutilated, piled on top of each other. A woman searches for her children. She finds them in the schoolyard, both dead, burned beyond recognition. She only identifies them by their lunch boxes. A father finds his family's home. It's a crater. Nothing left. He digs with his hands, looking for bodies. Finds nothing. They were vaporized. The survivors are worse off than the dead. Burns covering 80% of their bodies, skin hanging off in sheets, eyes melted, lips burned away. They beg for water. They're given water. They die anyway. Radiation sickness. Nobody understands it yet. People who seem fine suddenly get sick. Vomiting. Diarrhea. Hair falling out. Gums bleeding. Then death. Painful. Slow. Inevitable. A young woman named Sadako Sasaki is 2 years old, 1 mile from ground zero. She survives without visible injury. 10 years later, she develops leukemia, radiation-induced cancer. She folds 1,000 paper cranes, a Japanese tradition, supposed to grant a wish. She wishes to live. She dies at age 12. By 8 p.m. on August 6th, 140,000 people are dead or dying. 350,000 population reduced to 210,000. 40% casualties in 12 hours. The city is still burning. Bodies are everywhere. Survivors are dying from radiation. Medical help is non-existent. Hospitals destroyed, doctors dead, supplies vaporized. And 6,000 miles away in Potsdam, Germany, President Harry S. Truman receives a message. Hiroshima bombed successfully at 08:15 Japanese time. Results exceeded expectations. Visual observation and strike photos show city destroyed. Truman reads it again, then announces to his staff, "It's time to go home." Someone asks how many casualties. "We don't know yet," Truman says. "Probably tens of thousands." He's wrong. It's 140,000. But Truman doesn't know that yet. Won't know for days. At 11 a.m. Washington time, Truman issues a public statement. 16 hours ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima, an important Japanese army base. That bomb had more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. The statement continues, warning Japan to surrender, threatening a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. In Tokyo, the Japanese government receives reports. Hiroshima destroyed by single bomb. They don't believe it. Assume it's exaggeration. Multiple bombs, maybe, or conventional firebombing. But one bomb destroying an entire city? Impossible. Emperor Hirohito demands verification. sends investigators to Hiroshima. They arrive August 7th. What they find confirms the impossible. One bomb, one city, destroyed. They report back to Tokyo. The military leadership convenes. War Minister General Korochika Anami speaks first. "This changes nothing," he says. "We can absorb this damage. Japan will fight to the last man." "Even if they have more bombs?" someone asks. "We don't know that they do," Anami says. "This might be their only bomb. And even if they have more, Japanese spirit will prevail." He's wrong, dead wrong, and he's about to find out. Section 7. Nagasaki. The second hammer falls, 1,200-1,400 words, August 9th, 1945. 3 days after Hiroshima. Tokyo, Japan. The Supreme War Council meets. 6 men who control Japan's military. Emperor Hirohito presides, but by tradition, doesn't vote. The council is deadlocked. 3 want to surrender. 3 want to fight. War Minister Anami leads the fight faction. Hiroshima was one city, he argues. Japan has many cities. We still have 4 million soldiers. 7,000 kamikaze aircraft. The Americans will have to invade. And when they do, we will bleed them so badly they'll be forced to negotiate. Foreign Minister Togo Shigenori counters. The Americans have proven they won't negotiate. They have a weapon that can destroy cities in seconds. If they have more, Japan will be obliterated. Do they have more? Anami asks. Nobody knows. American propaganda claims they do. But Japanese intelligence is skeptical. Producing one atomic bomb must require enormous resources. America probably only had 1, maybe 2, but not more. The meeting drags on. Hours of argument. No resolution. At 11:01 a.m. the argument becomes irrelevant. Nagasaki. A B-29 named Boxcar appears over the city. Primary target was Kokura. But Kokura is covered in clouds. Visual bombing impossible. Boxcar diverts to secondary target. Nagasaki. Population, 240,000. Major port city. Shipyards, steel production, torpedo factory, but also homes, schools, hospitals, churches. At 11:02 a.m., Fat Man drops from the bomb bay. Different design than Little Boy. Plutonium implosion bomb. More powerful, more reliable, more horrifying. It detonates at 1,650 feet altitude. Yield, 21,000 tons of TNT. Bigger than Hiroshima. But Nagasaki's terrain is hilly. The blast is partially contained. Only 74,000 die. The pattern repeats. Vaporization, incineration, shockwave, firestorm, radiation. But with one difference. Nagasaki has been warned. They heard about Hiroshima. Some people evacuated. Those who stayed knew what was coming. When they saw the flash, they dove for cover. It didn't help. The flash means you're already dead. At Urakami Cathedral, morning mass in progress. 12,000 Catholics in Nagasaki, largest Christian community in Japan. The cathedral is 800 yards from ground zero. Father Tamaya is celebrating mass. 50 parishioners in attendance. At 11:02 a.m. the cathedral vaporizes. Everyone inside dies instantly, all 51 people. The cathedral built in 1925, 20 years of construction, gone in 0.1 seconds. At Mitsubishi Steel Works, 5,000 workers on the day shift, making steel for Japanese warships. The factory is 1,200 yards from ground zero. The buildings collapse. 4,300 workers die, crushed under steel beams, ironic death, killed by the metal they were making. In Tokyo, Emperor Hirohito receives the news. Second atomic bomb. Second city destroyed. 74,000 more dead. Total, 214,000 casualties in 3 days. Anami still wants to fight. We can endure this, he insists. Hirohito overrules him. For the first time, the emperor speaks. I cannot bear to see my innocent people suffer any longer, he says. The war must end. Continuing the war can only result in the annihilation of the Japanese people and the complete obliteration of human civilization. The council votes 4-2 in favor of surrender. Anami requests permission to commit seppuku. Hirohito grants it. On August 15th, Anami kills himself. His suicide note, atoning for Japan's defeat with my death. August 15, 1945. Hirohito records a radio address, the first time most Japanese hear their emperor's voice. The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb, the power of which to do damage is incalculable, taking the toll of many innocent lives. Should we continue to fight, it would not only result in an ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation, but also it would lead to the total extinction of human civilization. The war is over, 2,194 days after Pearl Harbor, and it ended because Harry Truman decided to use atomic weapons. 2 bombs, 3 days, 14,000 dead. The decision that killed more people faster than any decision in human history. Section 8. The Aftermath. Judgment. 1,200 words. August 15, 1945. Washington, D.C. Truman addresses the nation. I have received this afternoon a message from the Japanese government agreeing to unconditional surrender. Celebrations erupt. Times Square, Piccadilly Circus, Champs-Élysées, millions celebrating. The war is over. American boys are coming home. Truman is a hero, except to the 214,000 dead, and their families, and the survivors, and a growing number of Americans who start asking questions. September 9, 1945. Federal Council of Churches issues a statement. The use of atomic bombs was morally indefensible. September 12th. Christian Century magazine publishes an editorial. America has committed the greatest single atrocity in human history. September 18th. Physicist Leo Szilard, who worked on the Manhattan Project, gives an interview. The bomb should never have been used without warning Japan first. We could have demonstrated it on an uninhabited island. September 22nd. 67 scientists who built the bomb sign a petition. The president should have explored all alternatives before using this weapon on civilians. Truman reads every criticism, every editorial, every petition. His staff advises him to ignore them. You ended the war, they say, saved American lives. History will vindicate you. But Truman can't ignore it, because some of the criticism is valid. Nobody warned Hiroshima. No demonstration was given. No negotiation was attempted after Hiroshima before bombing Nagasaki. The bombs were simply used, without warning, without mercy. October 8, 1945. Press conference. A reporter asks if Truman regrets the decision. No, Truman says immediately. The atomic bomb saved millions of lives by ending the war quickly. What about the 214,000 Japanese who died? The reporter presses. Truman's expression hardens. I'll tell you what I think about that. When you have to deal with a beast, you have to treat him as a beast. The room erupts. Reporters shouting questions. Did the president just call the Japanese beasts? Truman realizes his mistake, but doesn't back down. The Japanese started this war, he says, with a sneak attack that killed 2,400 Americans. They killed prisoners, tortured civilians, refused to surrender when the war was lost. The atomic bomb stopped that, and I would do it again. The backlash intensifies. Religious groups call Truman a war criminal. Intellectuals demand his resignation. Even some military leaders question the decision. Admiral William Leahy, Truman's own chief of staff, writes in his diary, "The use of this barbarous weapon was of no material assistance in our war against Japan." Leahy is wrong, but his criticism stings, because he's the highest-ranking military officer in America. October 15, 1945. Truman receives a letter from Albert Einstein, the physicist whose theories made the bomb possible. Einstein's letter is respectful but devastating. He argues the bomb should have been demonstrated first, that Japan should have been given a chance to surrender before cities were destroyed, that rushing to use the weapon was morally wrong. Truman writes a response, never sends it. His staff advises against engaging. But Truman's unsent letter reveals his thinking. Dear Professor Einstein, I received your letter regarding the atomic bomb. I appreciate your concern, but you were not in my position. You did not have to choose between Japanese civilians and American troops. I did, and I chose American lives. I would make the same choice again. Respectfully, Harry S. Truman. The letter stays in his desk. but it captures Truman's core belief. A president's first duty is to his own people, not to the enemy, not to abstract moral principles, to American lives. And by that standard, Truman never doubted. Section 9. The Legacy. The Accidental President Who Changed Everything. 1-200-1-400 words. November 1945. 6 months after becoming president. Truman sits in the Oval Office, reading intelligence reports about Soviet expansion. Stalin hasn't slowed down. Poland is fully communist. Czechoslovakia is next. Hungary after that. The Soviet Union is building an empire. And Truman realizes the war didn't end. It just changed form. March 12, 1947. Truman addresses Congress. I believe it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. The Truman Doctrine. Committing America to containing communist expansion worldwide. For the next 40 years. June 5, 1947. Secretary of State George Marshall announces the Marshall Plan. $13 billion to rebuild Western Europe, equivalent to $173 billion today. It rebuilds destroyed economies, prevents communist parties from gaining power, binds Western Europe to the United States. Stalin rejects participation, calls it American imperialism, which it is, but it works. April 4, 1949. NATO is formed. North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Military alliance committing America to defend Western Europe. The alliance Churchill called for at Fulton, June 1948 to May 1949. Berlin airlift. Stalin blockades West Berlin, cutting off all ground access, trying to starve the city into submission. Truman orders an airlift. American cargo planes, flying supplies into Berlin every 90 seconds, for 11 months. Delivering 4,700 tons of supplies daily. Stalin backs down. The blockade fails. America stood firm. By 1950, Truman has created the framework that will define American foreign policy for 50 years. Containment, Marshall Plan, NATO, all Truman's policies, all successful. The man who knew nothing in April 1945 became the architect of the post-war world by 1950. January 20th, 1953. Truman's last day as president. Dwight Eisenhower is being inaugurated. Eisenhower arrives at 8:45 a.m., but refuses to enter the White House, sits in his car, waiting for Truman to come to him, a calculated insult. During the campaign, Eisenhower attacked Truman viciously, called him soft on communism, blamed him for the Korean War, accused him of corruption. Now he won't even shake Truman's hand inside. Truman watches from the window. Bess stands beside him. "You should make him wait," she says. Truman shakes his head. The office deserves respect even if he doesn't. Truman walks out, gets in the car. The ride to the Capitol is silent. After the inauguration, Truman and Bess take a train home. Independence, Missouri. No Secret Service, no staff, no motorcade. Just two people going home. On the train, a reporter asks how it feels. "Relieved," Truman says. "What are you most proud of?" Truman thinks. "We contained Soviet expansion, rebuilt Europe, established NATO, stood firm in Berlin, proved democracy could compete with communism. What about the atomic bomb?" Truman's expression doesn't change. "I made the right decision. I'd do it again." December 26, 1972. Harry S. Truman dies, age 88. Historians now rank him among the top 10 presidents. His approval rating when he left office, 32%. Today, over 70%. Because time revealed what people couldn't see in 1953. Truman's policies worked. The Soviet Union was contained. Western Europe recovered. NATO prevented World War III. The atomic bomb ended the Pacific War. Every decision Truman made proved correct. Not because he was brilliant, not because he had perfect information, but because he refused to be paralyzed by uncertainty. Section 10. The Final Truth, 500-600 words. The real story of Harry Truman isn't about atomic bombs, or Cold War strategy, or standing up to Stalin. It's about what happens when an ordinary person is given extraordinary responsibility. Truman had every excuse to fail. He wasn't prepared, wasn't briefed, wasn't chosen for his abilities. He was chosen because he threatened nobody. But when the burden fell on him, he didn't run. He didn't blame Roosevelt for not preparing him. He didn't complain about the impossible situation. He just did the job, one decision at a time, one crisis at a time. 82 days of knowing nothing, followed by 115 days to decide whether to kill 214,000 people, followed by 2,139 more days of building the framework that won the Cold War. And when it was over, he went home. No book deals worth millions, no corporate board seats, no cashing in on the presidency. Back to Independence, Missouri. Same house he'd lived in before, same walks, same neighbors, as if being president was just another job. Because to Truman, it was. The hardest job, but still just a job that needed doing. In 1959, a reporter asked if he had regrets. "None," Truman said. "I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. That's all anyone can do." That's the real story. Not a great man making heroic choices. An ordinary man making impossible choices with insufficient information and zero preparation, and refusing to break. 214,000 people died because of his decisions, but potentially millions more lived. The Cold War stayed cold because of his policies. Western Europe rebuilt because of his vision. Democracy survived because of his stubbornness. Was he right to drop the atomic bombs? Historians still debate that. Was he right to contain Soviet expansion? History says yes. Was he the right person for the job? Nobody knows. Because nobody chose him for his abilities. He was an accident, a placeholder, a warm body to fill the constitutional requirement. But when the burden fell on him, he carried it for 8 years and changed the world. That's the story of the 82 days. The story of an unknown man who inherited 2 atomic bombs and the power to end the world, and used that power, and lived with the consequences, and never apologized. Because Harry S. Truman believed that showing doubt was worse than making hard decisions. And whether you think he was a hero or a war criminal, you have to admit one thing. He made the hardest decisions in human history, with less preparation than most people get before a job interview, and he never broke. That's the real story, not the decision, the man who made it.